What is up, guys? This is Derek Kirby back with another edition of Positively Relentless. It looks once again like I am riding solo tonight. Uh, Later start than usual, normal stuff there. But I am in the office, so that's at least hopefully a step in the right direction. I've actually got a little bit of my general aesthetic and whatnot here, so. We're going to be talking about the Christian Wood possible extension. Dallas has an interesting situation on their hands because they're basically mid-season being forced to hammer out an extension or decide if they're going to just trade Christian Wood at the deadline, which is a February 9th deadline. Shout out to Christian Doe, first in the house. What's good? Or at least first in the chat. Appreciate you. So Christian Wood has been eligible since Christmas at this point for a contract extension. And what they have to figure out now is how committed they are. They have had a drastic turnaround as far as the team's overall productivity. Their win-loss record with Christian Wood in the starting lineup has been substantially better. Imagine that. You know, that thing we talked about all offseason? Imagine that. Crazy. Christian Wood in the starting lineup has been very good for the Mavericks. It's not even just that you're getting more two-man game with him and Luka, which works better. The Mavericks per 100 possessions with Luka and Christian Wood on the floor together, I think is like 7.3 points better per 100 possessions. That's sizable. Luka's own productivity better. He averages about 35 with him, 35 and a half, I think, with him on the floor. When Christian Wood's not on the floor, Luka averages about 33. So it's still Luka. It's still remarkable, but it's not quite as high. He's better with Wood. It's another guy that has a gravity to him and another dynamic weapon he can get involved in the game. So Christian Wood in the starting lineup. Mavericks have been, I think, like 9-4. They're on their longest winning streak of the Luka Doncic era now at 7 games. And yeah, it's been against a lot of kind of ho-hum teams, but you got to win the games. And considering how this team has been up and down and not beating the teams they're supposed to beat for much of this year, I'm going to take it. You can't take it away from me. I'm going to take it. Shout out to Carlos Holloway and TGK TV. What's good? TGK says, Seawood. I wish the chat showed the chat that's already going and not just the new stuff that comes in. TGK says, Seawood is everything KP was supposed to be with Luka. I agree. At least, I was going to say at least offensively, but you know what? Since coming into the starting lineup, Christian Wood's averaging about 2.8 blocks, I think, and that was Grant Afseth on Twitter who had that stat. Remarkable there for a guy that has not exactly built his reputation on defensive effort, and especially now with Maxey essentially gone for the year, to have him step in, Christian Wood, I mean, on the defensive end and be giving the Mavericks some solid rim protection is really promising. So yeah, he is currently living up to the expectations of what KP and Luka was supposed to look like together. A little bit of irony there, you know, Luka got Player of the Month, but he got, before that, Player of the Week, and he was sharing that honor with Kristaps Porzingis. That's a little bittersweet. A little bittersweet there, but good for KP. So, yeah, with Christian Wood in the lineup, the Mavericks have been much better. They're finally kind of turning some things around. They're up to 4th in the Western Conference, and they're making a little bit of noise. I would still say they're having to put way too much usage on Luka. They're still having some substantial issues they got to work through. But this is an interesting situation now as they have to navigate this potential extension with Christian Wood, because Christian Wood, you know, he's 27, 28 years old. He's had like 7 teams. He's bounced around. He has never really put down roots somewhere. He wants a long-term option. He wants security. This is the first competent team he's played with, and he's playing with a generational talent. Yeah, he had a little bit of crossover with James Harden there at the end in Houston, but Not much. And Harden was already kind of trying to force his way out by then. So this is a place he wants to put down some roots. He said as much himself. He likes playing here. He likes the franchise. He likes the playing with Luka. He likes the locker room. He wants to be here. Now, of course, for a guy knowing, hey, they have my bird rights, they can give me the most money. Yeah, probably gonna go with that route. But here's some things to consider. One, there are only 10 teams with cap room to fill Christian Wood at the level they project that he'll get. So if that's the case, you can then eliminate 2 more of those teams, Houston and Detroit, because they had and traded Christian Wood previously. Odds are they're not really married to the idea of having him. So a pool of about 8 teams at that point. That is still sizable competition. Dallas does have the ability to offer him more. Now that the role has kind of finally come into form a little bit, and it looks kind of like it should, and we expected it to, I'm hoping that he can kind of settle in and be more comfortable here and kind of see, hey, maybe I can do more than just light it up on the offensive side. Maybe I can contribute in these other areas, become a more well-rounded player, and play team ball and not just kind of get my points here and there where I can. But the guy has always said and done the right thing. The thing as well is if Dallas does trade Christian Wood, the team that acquires him can't sign him to an extension for 6 months, just like Dallas couldn't. So what's the incentive? Yes, that team would acquire his bird rights, but he would be hitting free agency nevertheless. That's not like they lock him down the moment they trade for him. Aside from getting his bird rights, that is a mammoth risk for that team, especially if it's a team that's not really contending. Like if it's a team that's middle of the road or bottom of the barrel, they're going to be hard pressed, even with his bird rights potentially, to convince him to re-sign there, because he has said he's never really played on a winning team. He wants to play on a winning team. He now has that opportunity. So yeah, not a lot of incentive for him to remain, aside from potentially getting just a little bit more money from that team acquiring his rights. So Dallas is looking right now, the talk seems to be that they've engaged his agent in extension talks. But it seems like Dallas is more interested in a shorter term contract. Like Dallas is interested in a 2, maybe 3-year deal with a team option. Now I say 2, maybe 3, because I mean 2 years plus a player option for year 3. That does not fit with what Christian Wood would want. Christian Wood probably wants more like 4. Of course, I'm sure he'd be open to 5, obviously. But he's going to want, obviously, a player option, not a team option. And he's going to want something with more long-term security. I can't say I blame him. Just like I said, he's 27 or so. He's played on 7 teams. The guy wants and deserves a chance to put down roots, especially when he's done nothing but do all the right things since he got here. He has said all the right things. He has played with effort. He has tried to conform to whatever was being asked of him. And now you're seeing that come to fruition. His on-the-floor product alongside Luka is as good as advertised, as hoped. And now you have an opportunity to say, hey, we have these 2 foundational pieces. We can start building something. Because the pinch for Dallas here is that they can't have back-to-back seasons in which their second best player walks for nothing. And they really, really botched, as TGK is pointing out in the chat, referencing Brunson. They botched that before. We've talked about this till we're blue in the face. Brunson, coming into last year, would have taken a $55 million extension, which is basically the Dorian Finney-Smith extension. He would have taken it at the trade deadline. Dallas still did not offer it. And I actually think the fact that Dorian Finney-Smith, and he deserved the money, he earned the money, and I think he's been a bit down this year, but Dorian is a very much deserving, worthwhile investment for this team. Let me turn off my logo there as it's blocking some of the comments. There we go. Is a very deserving, worthy guy of that contract, but it's not lost on me that Brunson reportedly would have taken the same exact deal that Dodo got. And when Brunson wasn't given that, but Dodo was, that was kind of one of those things of like, okay, I'll remember that. Like, I was willing to take the same thing. You said, no, we're going to go this direction. Nothing against Dodo. But if you're Brunson, you're playing with a chip on your shoulder. He always has. He didn't think he should be a second-round draft pick. He didn't think that he should have been a second unit backup point guard playing second fiddle to Luka. And when he showed he was at least deserving of being a quality starter, and he'll probably be an all-star this year, showing he's capable of all that, nobody thought he was deserving of it or worthy of it until then. Now he's showing out and he's doing all of this. So it basically boiled down to, the Knicks, the collusion, whatever. We know, tampering, that's the word I was looking for. We know about all that. But it put it in a situation where Brunson kind of felt disrespected by Dallas. They had multiple opportunities, and even after the season ended, they didn't think they should have to pay essentially as much as the Knicks were willing to offer. They're like, look, we know we have your rights, but like that's not the role we view you in. You should want to play here because of the locker room chemistry and the role you've now carved out for yourself here. And that just didn't, I think for Brunson, it was kind of like one disrespect too much. And so that's why, even though he didn't get to play in his return game to Dallas, when Dallas and the Knicks did play, the couple times he was asked about the situation with Dallas, did they do everything they could to keep you? Brunson kind of hesitated and then said, next question, please. He felt disrespected. And I think Dallas is playing a dangerous game here with Christian Wood. Similar game. They look at a guy that they say, look, he's a very nice player. We would like to have him, but we have a very set idea of what we want to pay him or what role we want to utilize him for. And they're not really putting it to its full wisest use. And what they're doing is they're running the risk of disrespecting the player, frustrating the player, so much so that come the offseason, they're going to run a very severe risk of losing him for nothing. And you can't have back-to-back off seasons in which that happens. It will shatter the perspective around the league of guys wanting to play with Luka, of Dallas being headed in the right direction. Let's just throw that out there as we're talking about, a tight window of contending again, while you have Luka proving to him that you can be a real contender and building around him. You can't have back-to-back seasons where you lose your second best guy for nothing. So Dallas won't let that happen. The Mark Stein report is that basically Dallas is trying to hammer out an extension, but they have a pretty set idea of what they want to do. And if they're not able to hammer out an extension, they will probably look to shop him at the February 9th trade deadline. They will make sure at the very least they get something back. They have learned at least that much from the Jalen Brunson situation. So it's interesting that in some respects, like, okay, they did learn something, but then in other respects, you're like, I don't think this is the takeaway I wanted. I wanted you just to get a new deal. As Rivs brings up Tim Hardaway Jr., and again, it's a different front office. Timmy was signed there at the very end. I'm trying to remember. The Hardaway extension was last year. It was 2 years ago was the Hardaway extension. I'm trying to remember if we had Donnie Nelson still. Let me know in the chat. As I recall it, Donnie Nelson was still around when we signed an extension for Tim Hardaway Jr. Because last year was the first year of Nico and Kid, and they were part of the new regime. So Donnie would have still been there, yeah. Donnie Nelson in that version of the front office, granted, obviously Cuban is still there, gave Tim Hardaway Jr. gleefully $19 million a year, but he wouldn't give Brunson that same money when that was on the table, and he wouldn't give or seems reluctant to give something along those lines for Christian Wood. Now, the number I've heard floating out there for the per of Christian Wood, I think was 26. For what he brings, it's a little... I think for what he has the potential to bring and what he means to your team, it's good. It does feel a little high, only because I don't think they're utilizing him to his full potential, although they're doing a much better job recently. So I'm curious to see kind of how they take that next step. But they've got to figure out something. It's a different front office, but you can't look at the decision making and be like, hey, we're not going to extend Jalen at a very reasonable price. We are going to give, however, extensions to Maxey, to Dwight Powell, and we are going to obviously Hardaway the year before that, give him a new deal, but we're not going to keep Brunson and we're not going to keep Christian Wood. It's like, if you look at these order of operations, the only guy you can make an argument for, I would say, is Dodo. I've not really been a huge fan of the Maxey one. He's a great rotation guy. I like Maxey. I think he's a very good defender, and his absence, although I don't think it's been felt terribly yet, I do think it will be felt. I think this team defensively is going to miss having him around, if for no other reason, even though Christian Wood has stepped up very well recently. I think it's one of those things that as the season wears on in Maxey's absence, and then of course once he gets postseason, you're really going to miss that presence, just for, if nothing else, another capable defender, particularly in Maxey's case, a versatile defender who can defend a little bit on the perimeter. That's going to really hurt you not having that. So if you look at this team then and you say, well, what are they going to do at the deadline? And this is where I'm going to jump into some of the comments you guys have here, some of the things you're discussing. We know that the Hardaway contract and the Bertans contracts are albatrosses around this team's neck, as Innie has pointed out whenever he's been on the show. It's why in the immediacy of last year, the Porzingis-Dinwiddie trade was a stroke of genius, because Dinwiddie has been very good for the most part for the Mavericks. He has done well this year alongside Luka, and you've still gotten flickers and flashes here and there of Bertans and what he can give you. But the problem was, you basically took two guys whose contracts equated to what Porzingis's was, but it's two guys that aren't really a put you over the top combination. You could say if your team was in the right position, Dinwiddie could be, but it's those two type of players at basically the same total money for the same stretch of years remaining. So you didn't really get the relief you were hoping for, and you didn't really get the on-court improvement you were hoping for. You're going to have to find a way to get out from under those contracts, or not the Dinwiddie, but the Bertans and the Hardaway contracts at this point. And your options for that, Donnie left in the middle of 20. Yeah. It wasn't the middle of the year calendar wise, but not the middle of the season. But what you have to figure out here is what options that you're able to work with. And the real flashy name that's showing up a lot right now is Zach LaVine. I actually really like this one. It's a name that's been kind of a pipe dream for a few years for Dallas in terms of a star pairing with Luka. I think Zach LaVine is a very good player. He's not going to be a top dog here, obviously, but it's a real athlete and a real dynamic playmaker to pair alongside Luka. And with where the Bulls are at, I think there's real opportunity there. They're kind of sliding a little bit. He's already playing second fiddle essentially to a mid-30s DeMar DeRozan, who, by the way, I still really like. I still really wish Dallas had made a hard push to get DeMar DeRozan last offseason, but or was it 2 off seasons ago? I honestly don't remember. I think it was 2 off seasons ago. Honestly, though, it is what it is. But Zach LaVine would be a fantastic pairing, and I think this might be the right time to strike on a deal like that, because I think Chicago is kind of in a rut. They spent a whole lot of money, and the experiment really has not worked out for them in these 2 years. And a big part of that is obviously they hitched their wagon to Lonzo Ball, and he's been dealing with knee issues. He hasn't really played much in a while, so that's kind of complicated things for them. But I think Chicago is one of those teams that will look to shake things up and change things around a little bit. And it would not surprise me if you actually do have a situation where a guy of Zach LaVine's caliber comes available and at a reasonable price, not quote unquote sticker price, but comes available, and he would be a phenomenal pairing alongside Luka. Now, to do that, you're going to have to move Christian Wood, I'm sure, because it's not like you can just send off your castaways. You can't just say, here's Tim Hardaway and Bertans. Done deal. They're going to want something back to give them a sense to build around. So I think your ideal situation, if you do make a big trade, let me see, Reeves saying just give Chicago Hardaway, Bertans, and a first for LaVine or Murray from Atlanta. See, I don't know that that's going to work. First of all, I don't think we can give a first away right now because we're still waiting for that KP deal with the Knicks to run its course. I think next year. Is it next year? Yeah, I think it's next year is the first year we have our first back. And so until then, we can't trade, I don't think, a first. But with that being the case, also for where we would be picking, I just don't know that would entice Chicago quite enough. But your pipe dream, your best case scenario, I should say, is probably LaVine. I think that's the best caliber player you can hope to get in return. What you have to give up for him, I'm not sure. But I do know I would like to see Dallas not fumble the bag here, so to speak. I want to see them actually retain and extend Christian Wood. I don't think a 3-year deal with a team option in year 3 is going to do it. But if you can make it work for that, then okay. I want him here to build around a little bit, and I can understand if he's already almost 28 years old, being a little reluctant to give a 5-year deal to a front court player who hasn't had the most glowing reputation until now. And even now, there are still people that kind of give him the side eye if you look at perception around the league. So they see him, they're like, hey, he's a guy who can light it up at times, but is the effort always there? I would say it generally is. I think it's a little bit of his prior stops and prior reputation preceding him, but we just got to see. I would like for Dallas to keep him and add to what they're building with him and Luka, and maybe that makes it where you don't make a sizable trade here at the deadline this year. If that's the case, then you got to get real aggressive in the offseason. I said before, I think this next stretch here, this 6-month window basically between the trade deadline and the summer are essential. I think you need a first decent piece here to add to the puzzle, and then you need to kind of put the next major component in position this summer in free agency. Let me run through some of the comments here, see if I'm getting everything. TGK says, I'd really like for us not to fumble like we did with Brunson. I do feel like he's worth a contract 4 for 77. Yeah, I'd say that's reasonable. Hardaway makes around that for comparison. We also need to extend Green. Yeah, Green's kind of one of those guys that's been a little forgotten about just because he's been out for a little bit. But yeah, Green's contract extension is coming up soon, and the sooner you do it, the better. And I think you've already seen enough from him to know you want to extend him. So from that standpoint, you're better off doing it now as opposed to waiting. Because if you wait and give him another full year to develop and to really show on the floor what he's capable of, that price tag goes up. That's just the nature of things. It's better to do business now, actually project where you think guys are going to be, than to say like, oh, well, we don't have to deal with this until, this point. And then that point gets there and you're like, huh? The price is what now? You don't want that. Kevin Hoffman, what's good? Honestly feel they're going to trade Wood at the deadline. I think it will be a mistake. I'm honestly thinking right now that that's where we're headed. I really do. And even him moving into the starting lineup, while it's what we've been screaming for, and while the success has been there on the floor since then, I kind of feel like it's a way of showcasing him. For whatever reason, I don't think Jason Kidd is convinced about Christian Wood. And I think he's already kind of got his mind made up on that. And so, like, if they got him at a 2, maybe a 3-year deal at a number they felt good with, or at least was, even if it's a higher number, but it's a shorter term thing, maybe they're willing to work with that. But if he is going to insist on that, even though you tell every other player to go get their money, get what they've earned and deserve, Dallas isn't going to do that, I don't think. I think they're going to basically dig their feet in and say, look, the mistake from Brunson wasn't that we didn't give him a new contract. It's that we didn't give him a new contract and then kept him on the team. Now, he was integral to that playoff run, that Western Conference Finals run. But Dallas made a lot of assumptions, and I think it bit them in the end. They completely, down to the last days of free agency, misread the Jalen Brunson situation. I think a co-star, this is from MT. I think a co-star to Luka is hard to find. You need to find a trade for a player like Middleton, George, Clay, but without many draft picks and bad contracts, it's hard. It's very hard. And this is why we've talked about this for I don't know how many years now. Dallas is not flush with assets. They have a nice catalog, a nice series of players who are nice players, but not something that you look at and say, this is the centerpiece of our future, or this is the centerpiece of this next big trade we're doing. None of these guys really fit that bill other than your generational talent in Luka. And, like I said, the perception of Christian Wood, he's your second best player probably. And even Dinwiddie, if you would argue he's your second best player, the perception of either of those guys, drop them on any other team in the league. Anybody would tell you, if that's your best player, you're screwed. If it's your second best player, who's your first? Oh, it's Luka? Okay, well, you're still probably pretty good then. But if it's like, oh, it's one of the Ball brothers, then it's like, ooh, yeah, you're probably a pretty mediocre team, middle of the pack. Or God forbid if it's a bad team, like a team in full rebuild mode or something like that, and they're looking at it like, yeah, Christian Wood's your second best, and you're a bad team, so you're probably not going to get full effort from him other than when he's trying to score. I don't know. So yeah, you're in a situation where you don't have a lot of assets. You have the one, it's like you have the one ultra rare holographic card, and then the rest of your deck is just trash. And it's like, okay, how are we gonna do this? How are we gonna acquire more good pieces? We don't really have enough that people want. If we got for Zach, I'm using the deal. I'm using to deal Hardy in that deal. I think you're saying I'm good to deal Hardy in that as long as Wood and Spencer is not involved. That would be ideal. So TGK is saying he would be willing, if it meant getting Zach, to also trade Jaden Hardy to the Bulls. I mean, that's your only prospect you feel real excited about. I mean, I guess you could still kind of say Green is a prospect. I don't really think of Green as a prospect at this point because he's kind of, quote unquote, arrived. I think prospects in terms of like, I know Green's year 3, but I tend to think in those terms. Hardy has the potential to be special, but he also has the more likelihood, I think, to be a nice player. Nice, not special. And if he's got to be the pot sweetener, to get you Levine. And again, the whole thing about this is you're trying to win in the next couple of years to prove to Luka that you're close, that you're ready. And Hardy, I think, is going to take some seasoning. As exciting as he can be when he comes in right now, I think you're going to be looking at year 3, 4, 5 Hardy and saying, okay, he's arrived. This, assuming he reaches that ceiling that we're talking about where he can be special. Like, okay, he's arrived, he's here, this is it. But even if you get to year 3, 4, 5 and he hasn't arrived and he's just a nice player, then it's like, okay, so we've got a nice rotation player. We could have had Zach LaVine a couple of years ago if we had, if we had assessed Hardy and said the perception of his talent and what we can get in return for that outweighs the likelihood of what he'll be. I think Dallas would kick themselves for that. They might say otherwise. They would probably tell you can't think that way or you can't view in the past, but I think that's just the reality of it. If they realized at yet another critical juncture they made the wrong choice because they over-assessed or over-perceived the potential for one of their internal guys, I think that would be detrimental for them. Let's see. MT was saying to that point, really trust in Hardy being our future solution as a ball handler when we can use Dinwiddie for a big guy and Mo Bamba or something. Maybe it fits. I'm intrigued, for sure. What do you think about OG and Trent Jr.? I like Trent Jr. a lot. OG, I would do a backflip and break my neck, but I would attempt to do a backflip if Dallas could somehow acquire him. And Toronto's in a bit of a, last I checked, honestly, I haven't looked at Toronto here recently, but I know they're in a little bit of a precarious position right now where they've got a lot of really nice players, like long, athletic, defensive type players, who any of which would fit perfectly with Luka. Like, legitimately, if you dropped Luka right now onto the Toronto Raptors, they're probably the best record in the East. That roster is so nice in terms of complementary pieces to put around Luka. But I don't know. If you could somehow get OG, I think that would be... It's one of those things where it doesn't have quite the same... To use a little bit of a weird term here, it doesn't have quite the same sex appeal as adding Levine might. But I think it could actually be the better move in the long run. I think you might get more benefit out of that in the longer run doing that than if you were to land Levine. And I also think your price is still going to be steep either way. But I feel for some reason like Levine might have just a little bit of like an inflation element to it, where because like the perception of him and all that he's done, his star value is perceived higher than OG, who is a very nice rotation player, but has not been perceived as a real star or something like that. So OG, I would love it. Trent Jr., I think would be fantastic. It's a more reliable kind of Hardaway option, I think. But I also mean, if we're doing that, then I kind of want to get away from Hardaway in the process. So complications there. But OG, whew, yeah, give me that. Luka being too good from the second he entered the NBA on is actually a problem because you don't get young players and need to try and win now. It's like LeBron when he played for the Cavs that first run. I get what you're saying. Because they didn't make the playoffs. Obviously, his rookie year, that was a bad year for Dallas. Year 2, trying to remember, I don't think they made it. No, they made it year 2. They made it year 2, lost in 6. Made it year 3, lost in 7. And then suddenly rattled off multiple series wins, got to the West Finals year 4 for Luka. So, yeah, it's it definitely complicates it, but I would also say that whoever Dallas had, they were going to have that kind of problem. Even if Dallas had gotten, even if they hadn't made the trade and they ended up with Trae Young, they were going to have this type of problem because I don't think Dallas has been good at roster building. They've had 5 years to put a competent team around Luka, and yet here we are for the second straight year saying, hey, our second best player might be leaving for nothing. Or we might just ship him out the door at the trade deadline just to get something now. Like, it's not good asset management, and it feels like they're trying to wait it out until that last first round pick for KP expires, essentially, until it's used. And they have all their assets at their disposal again. But the problem is, it's year 5. You can't really bank in year 5 on something like that. You can't be saying in year 5, we need to reset. No, man, year 5, you're supposed to already be there, or at the very least, close. If you had Brunson right now and Christian Wood, which you should have, you feel very different about this team. If you had Luka Doncic, Spencer Dinwiddie, Jalen Brunson, and Christian Wood, you feel different about this team. By the way, if you had Brunson, you wouldn't have the cap space to even go waste your money on JaVale McGee. Just throwing that out there. But yeah, instead, you got what you got. So we'll see. Riv says Toronto's down bad. Their record is 16-22, like 10th in the standings. It's funny how for like 3 years they kept doing this like campaign on social media, like bring Shy home. They wanted to bring Shai Gilgeous-Alexander home. He's from the Toronto area. Wanted to bring him home for them. And after a couple of years of saying that, now all of a sudden they're like talking about blowing it up. And yet you look at OKC and it's like, the Thunder are very intriguing to me right now. It's not just what SGA is doing, man. They have a lot of really nice players, and they are so stupid stacked with draft picks that they can't possibly use. I'm telling you, man, like next year, I think they start going for it because they're hitting that corner now where they're not bad enough to just lose and develop slow. Like, they're winning more games than they can to really be like in the mix for like the top pick this year, for instance. And so I think it's going to put them into a situation where they're like, all right, chips to the middle of the table, boys. Let's do this. SGA's ascension into superstardom has been sensational. They got a lot of very nice players as well, great complementary pieces, and they got the draft picks and draft capital to go make 1 or 2 or 3, even if they want substantial trades to acquire major pieces to go for it when they're ready. So that's a fascinating team to me. A team that's not there yet, but they're starting to threaten a little bit. You're starting to see the flash. I mean, they just without SGA the other night dropped 150 on the Celtics without their best player. I know this is kind of a weird year. Like Donovan Mitchell just had a 71, 11, and 8 game. Obviously, Luka had his 60, 21, and 10, or 11, whatever it was. Unbelievable, the stuff going on right now. Like, you can make a fair argument, like, is regular season defense a thing still? Are we still doing that? Because team and individual success we're seeing lately is through the damn roof. Fair question. But OKC legitimately looks fascinating. You're not going to get anything asset-wise out of them, most likely, because they've developed all their homegrown talent. But my point in what I was drawing the parallel between there is that OKC has done things. They get crapped on for tanking, which is hilarious because a lot of teams that have been at the bottom of the barrel for years and years and years have been there longer than OKC. OKC's only been down for like 2 years. 3 years ago now, this would be the 3rd year. They were a playoff team with Chris Paul. They were the 5 seed, I think. Ridiculous. So you look at it that way, and it's like, so they've been down for 2 years. They are flush to their ears with first round draft picks, and they've developed multiple like really quality players, like rotation players, a superstar, and these complementary pieces. They're down without their top pick this year, Chet Holmgren. Like, they're gonna be dangerous. They're going to be very dangerous soon. They've actually done it right. Dallas and their asset management, hell no. Hell no. Not in the least damn bit. So, yeah, if you're looking at Dallas and how they can maneuver versus OKC, for instance, even if you didn't have OKC's plethora of draft picks, if you just had the players themselves, OKC could do more. Yeah, Kings and Magic, but at least the Kings, hey, credit to the Kings, man. They're actually fun this year, and they look really nice. I'm actually kind of excited to see Sacramento be relevant again. But yeah, the Magic pretty much had that 1 year with Dwight Howard running to the finals in 2009, and now they've been irrelevant basically ever since. Yeah, TGK, that was definitely on par with what I was thinking and saying earlier. Speaking of McGee, he's got to go ASAP. Him and Bullock. Every time Bullock takes a shot, I get mad. Yeah, that's fair to say. Bullock has not had a good year, even with his knack for turning the corner come the new year. Hasn't really happened quite yet. He's had little moments here and there, but he hasn't put it together yet. He's having a bad down year, and at this point, I wonder how much of it's in his head versus an actual decline of some sort, because he was really good for them last year, and like, again, around the holiday season onward, really good for them last year, and in that playoff run was just fabulous. So it's frustrating, it's disappointing, and it's just yet another thing Dallas and the front office did not account for. And now they're scrambling to try and address it and realizing, ooh, we don't really have a backup plan for that. That's a common theme. Let's see. I got time for a couple more questions. If you guys got them, throw them in the comments. Hit me with a question or two. I can take a couple questions and then probably have to bounce out of here. I have been up since like 4 this morning, and my brain is starting to turn to mush, I feel. It's amazing how the child can wake up that early and angry, and then still the next night fight sleep for so long. Oh, let's see. Trying to see if there's any other points I had that I wanted to make here. MT asks, is there an opportunity to get Siakam? Would fit next to Luka. Can handle the ball a bit and defend also. Toronto is not really going anywhere. Wood, Hardy, Frank, Powell, and maybe a first. Siakam's nice. I would like Siakam for sure. I'm more honestly intrigued by OG. But Siakam's good. Toronto and how they view Siakam, they thought he was going to be like a big deal, because there was actually, and maybe you can say this was more the perception, and I'll get to that in a second. Before Oklahoma City, and I swear I'm not trying to bring it back to the Thunder. This is just, you mentioned Toronto, and this was a thing. Before the Thunder traded Paul George and Russell Westbrook in the span of like a week, there was trade talks with Toronto that would have sent both of them together to the Raptors, because at that point it was kind of understood, like, yeah, they're going to lose, in all likelihood, they're going to lose Kawhi Leonard, and this would allow them to kind of restock. They'd lose Leonard, but they would gain Westbrook and Paul George. And in part of the return back, OKC wanted Siakam. And Toronto said no. And they said no, as I recall the report, they said no because of the inclusion of Siakam. So that's interesting. I think they, at the time, really thought he was going to be a big deal, and he's certainly a very nice player, but he's never hit the level of stardom that I think they thought was possible. And that kind of gets back to the point I was saying earlier about Jaden Hardy. He has the potential to be very special, but I think there's a greater likelihood he's just a nice player. And a nice player is, hey, nice. But it's also one of those things where it's like you have to be able to evaluate the likelihood of a guy reaching that ceiling, and sometimes say, okay, right now there's the potential for him to reach that ceiling, and so a team is banking on that potential. But if I don't see the likelihood of him reaching that ceiling, I might get more out of the deal now in return rather than waiting and seeing it for myself. Perfect example, bringing it back to the Mavericks. Rodrigue Bois. Roddy B dropped 44 points on the Golden State Warriors in the 2009 season. His stock went through the roof. Teams were calling Dallas interested. That summer, they were interested. Dallas made clear he's not available. They were pretty convinced, like really convinced, so much so that a big part of why they thought that next year could be different. By the way, that next year was the title year, so yeah, it was, but not because of Roddy. A big part of why they thought that year could be really special was because of Bobois and what they thought would be his ascension. But he had broken his foot, and he never really got back. Carlisle handling young players, we know how that goes, and the foot and everything else. And you look at it and you're like, okay, that's just a bad luck. But it is another thing that I'm glad it didn't cost him a title. But that is a thing that legitimately Dallas got away with banking poorly, because if they had traded him, they could have gotten some really nice assets in return. Again, didn't affect anything, but you don't want to get starry-eyed because of what you think a guy might be. When you can get something more proven in the interim that can answer what you need and like check certain boxes your roster rebuild needs. Front office is horrible. It's crazy how they've racked up all those bad contracts and letting Brunson walk. Throw in the fact we might lose Wood. Yes, agreed. Do you think we could trade for Terry Rozier? Scary Terry is he's a nice player. Do I think they could? I think I think he's gettable for sure. I don't know if he's what they're looking for. Like, he can give you the ball handler, and he's a nice player. I mean, I've honestly not been super familiar with him in Charlotte, but I know what he was for Boston, and I saw that in Charlotte with a bigger expanded role, he was able to add the scoring that never really seemed like it was there in Boston. So I'm intrigued, but I also think that he would be kind of like adding in a oh yeah, that looks legit. I think it would be like equivalent of adding in kind of what you thought you had with Brunson prior to his breakout run during the playoffs last year. So a nice player, but it's like, what do I got to give up to get that nice player? And then what am I paying that nice player? So I don't know. I wouldn't hate it, but it's not my preferred move, if that makes sense. Prices. Oh my god. I just wanted to put him in mute. Whatever. Can I delete it? Does that work? Man, fine. Anyway, let me see. Other questions. Siakam. Yeah, so I answered it. Terry and Siakam. Yeah. So to reiterate real quick, just as I wrap this up, Christian Wood is eligible for an extension. If he's traded, that new team has to wait 6 months before they can assign him to an extension, at which point he'll hit free agency anyway. They would just have his bird rights. For what he's projected to get, there are 10 teams with cap space right now, 2 of which he played for previously, and so you can basically write them off. That being Houston and Detroit. Christian Wood, because he's like 27 and has been on like 7 teams, understandably wants to put down some roots. He likes it here. He says he fits. He likes playing with Luka. He fits the locker room chemistry well. Wants to be a part of it. The question is whether Dallas is willing to give him a probably 4-year deal like he wants with a player option. That's what it sounds like he wants. Dallas, meanwhile, is more interested in a shorter term thing, a 2 or 3 year deal with a team option. And the word seems to be that if they don't get the extension worked out between now and the February 9th trade deadline, they will try to move him because they're not going to let the Brunson situation happen again. So it's like, I'm glad they learned their lesson, but I don't know that they fully learned the lesson. So we'll see. What trade packages would you make for players we can realistically get? That sounds like a expansive topic for another video or another stream. I am working on that, so we'll have some options by the time that deadline rolls around where we can break down a lot of specific ideas and wish list, if you will. It's going to be super interesting moving forward because I don't know what this front office is. Yeah, what they're going to do. Yeah, I agree. But that does it for my time here. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you haven't already, please consider dropping a like, leaving a comment, subscribing to the Dallas Prospect. I will be back probably next week. I'll try and see if I can jump on here later in the week as well. But I'll be back soon. Hopefully James and I are able to kind of get our schedules back on the same page a little bit and do another joint show because it's positively relentless, but it doesn't feel quite the same with just me. I don't know. But thank you for tuning in. And until next time, guys, remember, every legend was once a prospect. Peace.